Hey there class, my name is Matthew Cassidy, and today I'm going to be going over my final project assignment for GEOG 2011 or Intro to GIS. So for my project, I decided to look at Grid 005, and I wanted to look at the geographical distribution of the 3 different bird species in Clown County. So as you can see right here, I create a small multi-layered map where you can see I have the brown-headed cowbird, the yellow-ruffed warbler, and the northern flicker, all distributions according to the counts and distribution of counts. You can see the legend right here, and you can also see the citation right here based on the data from eBird. So for this particular assignment, I want to basically divide up into 2 sections. One where I talk about the questions, the other part where I discuss the 2 main points that we discussed in class, and I want to relate it to this kind of graph here. So the first part is explain the 2 questions. And the first question is, are there any differences in geographic distribution of observations by species? And yes, there actually is a difference. As you can see for the distribution of the northern-headed cowbird, it is very concentrated here at the bottom. It's also very concentrated here north towards basically the lower southern end. You also have this concentration right here that's highly concentrated. And up here, the northern part, it's somewhat concentrated, but not really. But if you compare it to the distribution of the northern warbler, it actually is very, very different. The northern warbler is actually more concentrated towards in the middle, which you can see right here. They're bigger circle sizes, meaning there's bigger counts in there. You also have this one right here, which means there's a higher count compared to this one and the brown-headed cowbird. And compared to the brown-headed cowbird, this size right here is completely gone from this map, which means this size right here is actually a little bit bigger size count. And the distribution of the northern flicker is also different from the other 2 because in the northern part of the map, you can actually see that the size counts up here are very much larger compared to the other 3, while the size count for the bottom tier is actually not as big. You can also see that compared to the brown-headed cowbird, the distribution on this side is also gone, but the distribution for the northern part is very, very concentrated. And as you can see, compared to the 2, there is definitely a difference. And the second question is, where are the hotspots of observations for one of these species? For this question, I want to look at the distribution of the northern flicker. And after doing some research, I found that the main 3 grid cells with the highest counts for the northern flicker are grid cell 224, grid cell 1479, and grid cell 240, with counts of 1,167, 536, and 510 counts respectively. So grid cell 224 is located around Athens Quad in the State Botanical Garden, and after line up latitude and longitude, it is actually located right here at this grid cell right here. Grid cell 1479 is located around Sandy Creek Park, and after doing the same thing of locating the latitude and longitude, we found that it's actually located right here at this particular grid cell. And grid cell 240 is located on a street called 169 Deertree Drive, and again, by analyzing the latitude and longitude of the map, I found that it's actually located at this particular grid cell right here. So for the rest of this, I want to talk about basically 2 different points of basically comparing it back to our previous discussions in class. So first thing I want to talk about is basically the data classification. So for this particular maps right here, I used a graduated method, and I used the size method instead of the color method because I wanted to show how the size difference or the distribution difference actually shows up in each 3 different maps. And the data classification, how we discussed in class, is basically how you classify data and what are the ways to do it. In class, we discussed mainly 4 different types of classification sets: quantile, equal interval, natural breaks, and standard deviation. For this one, I went with natural breaks since we're both using quantitative data and we are based on distributions, which is the one I wanted to show up in basically the maps themselves. And the other one I want to talk about is VGI. So, also known as volunteer geographical information. We learned this particularly when we were discussing different programming types, particularly when you're using Twitter or social media and when you're using AGI. And you want to basically look at different comparisons across social media and also different things. Volunteer geographical information is basically entirely made up of volunteered information, which can be useful, but at the same time, it's also got some errors, meaning that it can be very uneven geographical coverage. It can also be unreliable, which you can kind of see in these maps because there are some areas that, aren't particularly colored in, while some areas are very, very well covered in. And I went with this one, VGI, as well, because the data we got all this from is data from eBird, which is a volunteer geographical informational website. And that is all the information that I have for this map. Thank you.